this is the Folksy Friend, and I'm going straight into a lore-heavy breakdown and a little bit of commentary on Rings of Power Episode 3. So in the opening scene here, it appears that the orcs are building some kind of tunnel. It's not fully underground. They have the top kind of roofed over with some, I guess, mesh and cloth to protect them from the sun because they cannot stand sunlight. They were created in the uttermost pits of darkness in Melkor's ice fortress, Antumno, that we saw in the first episode, and they cannot stand the brightness of light. So I'm not sure what it is exactly that they're digging here, but because it is outside during the day, they have to cover themselves. Okay, so let's go into how Numenor was created and founded. After the War of Wrath, the men that fought on the side of the Valar and the elves were awarded with what was called Andor, the land of gift. It was an island that supposedly shimmered with a golden haze and was fruitful and beautiful, and it is the westernmost island that humans can go to, as Galadriel says. There is one more island between them and Valinor, and that is Tol Eressëa, where there's elves living. And the elves of Tol Eressëa actually traded for a long time with Numenor up until the point where the Numenorians decided they did not want elf intervention anymore, and a little more of an explanation of that will kind of come a little later. Part of the blessing that they received from the Valar was that their lives would be longer than those of the men that stayed in Middle-earth because they fought under Morgoth, the enemy. They were still mortal because no human can overcome mortality, but their years were very long. They were also called, as well as Numenorians, the Dunedain. And if that sounds familiar, it's because we know that Aragorn in The Lord of the Rings is a descendant of the Dunedain, one of the last kind of branches of the Numenorian families that still exists in the time of The Lord of the Rings, and why Aragorn is able to achieve such a long life. These Numenorians have even a longer life still as time goes on, and kind of as they became more corrupted, I guess you could say, their lives did start to shorten. At the very beginning, the humans that were blessed with Numenor, they didn't get sick. They lived, like I said, for a very long time. Everything was peaceful and happy, and they really flourished, especially with the trade of the elves. It does say that they have less children than kind of the average, I guess, human that was still in Middle-earth, which makes sense. Similarly to elves who have very few children, if you live for a really long time and you have a ton of kids, you're going to get overpopulated really fast. So even though the show is showing us a compression of years, it's supposed to have been thousands of years since the founding of Numenor, and yet their population is still happy and flourishing on this island because you just don't have a lot of kids with the Numenorians. The only kind of limit that was placed on the Numenorians, because really, if you think about it, they were given a lot. The only limit that was placed on them was that they were not allowed to sail west. They could not go towards Tol Eressëa or towards Valinor. And they didn't really understand why they weren't allowed to do this. But Tolkien tells us that Manwë, who is kind of the king of the gods, again, kind of like Elwë, when I talked about it in the last episode, I'm making it more simple really than it is. So if you just kind of think of a pantheon of gods like the Greek or the Norse gods, then in that kind of structure, Manwë would fit in as the king of the gods. Manwë was concerned that if the humans try to sail west, they try to visit Tol Eressëa, they might get into their minds to go to Valinor, and they might start to want things that were not gifted to them. They might no longer be content with the things that they were already gifted. And you would not probably be surprised to know that he was right. And over time, the Numenorians do start to desire things that were not gifted to them. They want to know what the elves are hiding over there in Tol Eressëa, in Valinor. They want to know why they're not allowed to go there. Over time, thousands of years, they start to chafe at the restriction. They pull away from the elves. They start to ignore them and turn their ships away. They no longer worship the Valar, and they distance themselves from everything to do with the West. They become very self-involved in their own little bubble. And as they do that, they begin to know things like fear and sickness, and they become afraid of death because they have turned their back on kind of the light and the goodness that was offered to them by the elves and by the Valar. So they start to fall more into darkness. And over the years, as this continues, their lifespans get shorter and shorter and shorter. Still super long for a human, but shorter than it was in the past. And the longer this goes on, the more they begin to resent the elves. They blame them kind of for holding immortality that the humans will never get. And it starts to become kind of an issue of jealousy, really. And it's going to cause a whole lot of problems. That statue of the kind of waterfall man on his horses, I'm guessing that is supposed to be Ulmo, who is the god of the waters. He's actually someone that shows up in Elrond and Elros's family, helping different members of their family from time to time. And he is the reason their mother survived. He turned her into a bird when she fell into the sea. I will get into that whole story another day. Truly, I will. But Ulmo is definitely someone that they would want to revere. I think, especially in the beginning, back when they really did revere the Valar, because Ulmo, one, is the Mire of the Sea, and they are a seafaring folk, but two, because he has a personal connection to Elros, the first king. This statue in the bay, I'm guessing, is Elros himself. It makes sense that the first High King of Numenor would be the biggest statue in the bay. He's kind of reaching his hand out. I wonder if he's reaching it towards the west, towards Valinor, maybe almost an homage to his parents over there, or just a thank you, I guess, to helping the humans during the War of Wrath, or for giving them the island. In the distance, also, you can see a mountain in this shot. I'm guessing because it looks like the tallest peak on the island that is Melon Tarma. That was originally a holy place where they built a temple to the Valar, and they would kind of go there to pray or worship, really, the Valar as gods. Over time, as they started to kind of turn their backs on that, less and less people went up to Melon Tarma until eventually it was abandoned. This little flash of Halbrand looking at the forge is another one of those Sauron references. Sauron is a master smith, and we know because he's part of the creation of the rings. So it's so hard to know if this is just a red herring, if that's what Halbrand is, or if they are giving us these little clues because he is Sauron. The costuming, the coloring, I love it. Tolkien did say that the Byzantine Empire was a huge influence to his creation of Numenor. So to see blues and golds, the kind of Byzantine look to it all, I'm really glad that the showrunners pulled that aesthetic. So her whole introduction, Galadriel of the Noldor, daughter of the Golden House of Finarfin. So I mentioned before in my first episode about the House of the Noldor, that it's one of the three original houses of the elves that very first started out in the world. And she is the granddaughter of the first king, Finwë. When she says daughter of Finarfin, that is Finwë's son. He is the youngest of the three sons and the only one who has golden hair. So Feanor and his half-brother Fingolfin, they both have dark hair, as do most of the Noldor. But because Finwë's second wife, Indis, was of the Vanyar, she had golden hair like they all do, and so her children had golden hair, including Finarfin, and then his family, Galadriel, Finrod, all of them, their brothers as well. So they are known as the Golden House of the Noldor because of their hair. So Tar Miriel and Ar-Pharazôn. In the show, they're not giving them the prefixes of Tar and Ar, so T-A-R or just A-R. The thing about the prefixes, which I think is so fascinating, is that they show loyalty to the elves or to the Valar or disloyalty. Usually the kings of old had the prefix of Tar. So in the book, she is Tar Miriel because she and her father actually are both supportive of the elves and want to bring back the old ways. But that is the vast minority of Numenor. They would actually rather follow Ar-Pharazôn, A-R. He has that newer prefix because he is very much against the elves. So I understand linguistics, why they took out the prefixes, but I do think that it is very interesting because it shows us just from their very names whether or not they are loyal to the Valar and the elves. There is baby Isildur. It's the very same Isildur from The Lord of the Rings, King of Gondor. So we know at some point he is going over to Middle-earth, and it would be a bit of a spoiler for me to reveal how actually he makes it over to Middle-earth, in case you don't want me to spoil lore that's going to kind of, clue you in on the show. But what he is looking at here, I'm guessing, is Tol Eressëa, where the elves are. His whole family is still loyal to the elves and the old ways. So I'm guessing this is kind of a moment to show us that even though he is, doing his daily thing, he's on his ship, his heart is still kind of reaching towards the west, towards the elves, and it's a bit of a distraction for him. White tree, you may recognize it from Gondor. This is the kind of parent tree of that tree, and this was actually a gift from the elves of Tol Eressëa. They gifted them the first white tree that was then planted in the courtyard in Numenor, and then when stuff goes down later, Isildur will actually steal part of the tree to plant in what will become Gondor. So this is the original white tree. It's going to make its way over. Right now we can see that as far as we know, the city is kind of flourishing. It's nice and healthy, blooming. As we know, when the tree is dead and not blooming, it means that the line of kings is having some issues. So it's a good sign here at least to see that it's blooming. So Muriel here does make a comment that the white leaves of the trees represent the tears of the Valar, and it's kind of an indication that the Valar are still watching them. It's hard to tell if she's saying it in reverence, like the gods are watching, or if she's more kind of irritated or angry about it. Society would dictate that she should be unhappy or irritated about the idea of the Valar watching because they want to pull away from the Eldar and the Valar, but judging by the look on her face, there is more of a reverence there, and that would make sense because, like I said, she and her father are really supposed to believe in the old ways. To live for thousands of years and then to die so horribly like this, chained up, being used as slave labor, and then just cut down for no reason, I can't even imagine how they're all feeling in this moment. When elves die, their souls, spirits, I guess you could say, go somewhere called the Halls of Mandos, and that is in Valinor, and they just linger there. They just wait there. They stay. They cannot move on the way that humans do. And it's unclear whether or not dwarves move on in the same way, or if they truly are reincarnated like they believe. But elves are tied to this world, and they cannot leave it. They cannot move on into like a great abyss or heaven or whatever it is that Tolkien imagined that they go to next. So death for the elves is not just a scary prospect, it's also kind of an acknowledgement that that's it. There will never be anything peaceful beyond death. Although this forest is much likely further southeast than where he grew up, it is still likely that because he was posted here thousands of years ago, he watched this entire forest grow. If not from saplings, at least he watched it grow and expand. And to see it all cut down like this, not only that, but this depiction of just like the festering, like swampy area with all the trees cut down. It really does kind of remind me of what Tolkien will use as inspiration later for Mordor, that it does look like a no man's land. The idea that Galadriel could just cover her ear and nobody would know she's an elf, again, kind of calls back the issue that I'm having with the elves, that Tolkien's elves, really there is no hiding what they are. They have this ethereal grace. They have the light of Aman on them. And it just would not be possible to walk around downtown Numenor and people would not instinctively recognize that she's an elf. And I think the show is having a really hard time conveying the grace and the presence of the elves, and I think that's a shame. I don't know how they could improve it beyond different direction of their actors or different styling, but it is unfortunately quite a downfall. This is where we get our first proof that Elendil is in fact of the old ways, that he does still respect and admire the Valar and the elves. He does speak English, and the only reason that he would is because he comes from a lineage of people that do still respect the old ways. The way he goes from kind of irritated to jovial just like that is a little psychopathic, isn't it? And once again, is this because he is an evil character? Is it because he's Sauron? Or is it just a really intense red herring? I just don't really see Sauron as someone that would weather insult like this, that he would allow himself to be attacked in the first place, even if he was undercover. I think his pride is too strong for that, but we don't really know how the show's going to portray Sauron, so maybe. There they are, Elrond and Elros. The parting of the brothers, I can't even imagine. I'm not sure why one chose mortality and the other chose immortality. Their upbringing was, well, to say it was non traditional would be putting it lightly. They were raised by the people who essentially removed their parents from their lives. Once the kinslaying had kind of finished and Elrond and Elros's mother had fled to the sea with the Silmaril, the eldest two Fëanorian sons, Maedhros and Maglor, find the twins and decide they can't kill them. And Maglor kind of ends up raising them. And I don't even know what that would have been like for Elrond and Elros. I don't know if that's part of the reason that Elros made his decision to be human and not to live forever. I really don't know. But like I mentioned in the past, the reason they have this choice to be either mortal or immortal, and it's a choice they only make once, is because they have human blood in their ancestry. Also, the reason why Elrond is known as Elrond Half Elven. I can't quite tell with his statue. Does it look to you like she's coming out of the waves? Because if she is coming out of the waves, sorry if you can hear the dog over here. If she is coming out of the waves, then I would think that this is Elros's mother, Elwing. But then why would she be in the prison? Why would he put his mom in the prison? I'm just not sure about this one, about who she is. So Miriel is telling her father that Galadriel is there as if they foresaw it, which is possible because they do have the gift of foresight. The idea that they make an orphan carry their own cart, brutal. I had to look up in my Tolkien bestiary and the Lord of the Rings appendices more about the Harfoots to kind of understand why on earth they would leave behind members of their group who are ill. Why do they don't just delay their travel? And what I read is that nothing is really known about the hobbits before the year 1050 of the Third Age, and we are in right now the Second Age. So we're kind of in uncharted waters as far as history is concerned. So really the show has some liberty here to kind of do what they want with the hobbits. I just think that is cutthroat. A group that has such strong community bonds to just be like, sorry, your foot's broken. We're just gonna leave you here to die. I wonder if there are other groups of Harfoots wandering around. We just haven't seen them because they're not tracking with the Meteor Man storyline. I don't know. But I feel okay about it because, like I said, the show is kind of showing us a prehistorical time, really, of the hobbits. Seeing the elves fight is pretty cool. I've liked every kind of battle or fight sequence I've seen the elves in. Again, the orcs are at a distinct disadvantage in the sunlight because it physically hurts them. That is the kind of gravity defying move I accept from elves. Running up a bridge as it defies gravity, you know what I mean. That is not a warg. That is a demon chihuahua. I get that they're not supposed to look exactly the same as the Lord of the Rings, but if you removed the tremble from a chihuahua, this is what they would be. Again, the death of someone he's known for so long, it must be incredibly painful. It's got to be hard to see. I do kind of wonder here if this scene, if we're getting a little bit of a throwback to the way that Boromir dies when he's trying to save Merry and Pippin. The Marsh Warden here is going for help to save all of them. It doesn't take 3 arrows, it takes 2, but I do kind of wonder if that's supposed to be a little bit of an homage to that very famous death of Boromir. There's no way that's Sauron. That would be way too easy. Overall thoughts, I love the way they are depicting Numenor. I think they're keeping close to the books in terms of the aesthetic and the relationship that the people have with the elves. It's interesting that they made Miriel Queen Regent because that doesn't happen in the story, but I understand why. Because in the lore, Farazan forces her to marry him, even though they're cousins, so that he can be king. So clearly they're doing something a little different here, and I'm fine with it. Again, and I'm having kind of a problem with so much negativity surrounding the series. They're condensing the storyline because it is not possible to do a play-by-play depiction of the Silmarillion throughout the Akallabeth, throughout the story of Numenor. It's just not possible. It would be the most dry, boring show we've ever seen in our lives. To make it palatable and to have all this information in there, they're gonna have to condense and change some things. Just like the Lord of the Rings movies condensed and changed some things. It's gonna happen. I think that so far the show is doing a great job. I do have a problem with still the styling of the elves. Galadriel is kind of growing on me because I do understand that in canon, she is described as a strong and fierce woman. I think she's actually described as being the tallest of the female elves of the Noldor, and that she was actually kind of athletic and she was a little more manly, quote unquote, gender roles, a little more so than typical elf women. And I'm fine with her being a warrior. That's what Tolkien wanted to do, to go back and write more of her being a warrior. But the show seems to have gone 100% in on the warrior and taken away every other aspect of her character. That's what I'm not okay with. Let's see how she develops from here on out. If they let her have more of her wisdom back, not at the expense of her, her valor. That's fine. She can still be brave and fight. but I just don't want her to be a stupid warrior because that's not who she is. We're going to have to see. But thanks for spending some time with me. I hope you enjoyed this breakdown, and I will be back soon with episode 4. Thanks for spending some time with me, the folksy friend.